A 10-year-old flying solo in the premium cabin. A seasoned flight attendant's warning. Watch your tone echoing like a threat. In one brutal moment, a single punch shatters more than a jaw. It fractures our faith in safety and kindness at 30,000 feet. What could drive a uniformed crew member to cross that line? How does a child muster the courage to speak truth to power when every adult around him freezes in shock? And who steps forward when the world seems determined to stay silent? On Flight 2287, a federal judge sat mere rows away, an unwitting witness to an act of violence that would ignite a father's resolve and unleash a reckoning that reverberates far beyond the cabin walls. As secrets of concealed complaints and buried policies come to light, one family's battle for justice becomes a fight for every child's right to fly without fear. Are you ready to discover how a quiet boy's voice tore through a culture of cover-ups? Hit like if you believe no child should ever be silenced. Share to spread the truth, and subscribe now so you don't miss a moment of this powerful story. The boarding line moved slowly, a crawling procession of luggage wheels and restless sighs. Flight 2207 to Denver had just opened its gate, and the overhead voice repeated the final boarding call with the usual sterile calm. But for one child standing near the gate, the noise of the airport felt like it came from another world. Micah Elson adjusted the strap on his backpack, the tag around his neck swinging with a soft jingle. In bold letters, the laminated card read, "Unaccompanied minor." The string was a little too long, so the tag bumped awkwardly against his ribs with every step. He didn't mind. It meant he had a seat. It meant he was flying. A Sky Nova attendant smiled stiffly and waved him through. "Right this way." "Honey," she said, then turned her eyes back to the sea of passengers behind him. Micah walked slowly down the jet bridge, his sneakers tapping softly against the rubber floor. He held his backpack in both arms, like a shield, careful not to bump anyone or drag his feet. His mother had told him, "Be polite, speak softly, and stay in your seat." "You got this, baby," she had whispered that morning while smoothing his collar. "And remember, kindness travels farther than any plane." He hadn't forgotten. When he stepped onto the aircraft, the cabin lights felt too bright, the air just a bit colder than expected. A flight attendant stood by the door, tall and rigid in posture, his name tag glinting under the overhead bulbs. "Riker. Dean Riker." His eyes scanned the boarding group automatically, but when they landed on Micah, they narrowed just slightly. 3C, Micah said quietly, offering the small paper slip with both hands. Dean Riker didn't take the ticket. He just glanced at it, then nodded. "That's premium class," he muttered, almost like a warning. "I know, sir," Micah replied. "That's what they gave me at the counter." Dean said nothing more, only stepped aside. Micah made his way to the seat. 3C sat near the front, on the aisle, leather seat backs, wider armrests, and more space than he was used to. He placed his backpack carefully beneath the seat, double-checked the buckle, then pulled out a slim coloring book and a pack of markers his mom had packed. It wasn't something he'd normally take out in public, but it made the time pass. The plane continued boarding around him, heels clicking, suitcases grumbling, cabin noise rising. But Micah kept his head down. Occasionally, he smiled at a passenger who made eye contact. Most didn't. He watched the laminated in-flight menu tucked into the seat pocket ahead. His lips moved softly as he read, tracing the options like they were part of a treasure hunt. Under beverages, it listed coffee, tea, apple juice, and sparkling water. He circled apple juice silently in the air with his finger. That would be nice, familiar, sweet and cold, like at home. When the final boarding call was made, Dean passed through the aisle with forced efficiency, checking seatbelts and overhead bins. He stopped abruptly by 3C. "You need anything?" he asked flatly, not looking at Micah. Micah sat up straighter. "May I have apple juice?" "Please." Dean's face didn't move. "We're out." Micah blinked, then pointed gently to the menu in the seat pocket. "It says there's apple juice," he said quietly, more surprised than insistent. Dean's jaw tightened. "I said we're out." Micah looked down. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to watch your tone," Dean snapped, the words landing heavier than necessary. Micah froze. His small fingers gripped the edge of his coloring book. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't used the wrong words. His voice had been soft, measured. "I wasn't being rude," he whispered. Dean didn't move. Not yet. But something behind his eyes shifted. The muscles in his neck pulled taut. His stance turned deliberate, the kind of stillness before a storm. Row 3 felt quieter than it should have. A man across the aisle glanced up from a newspaper. A teenage boy 2 rows back peered up from behind a pair of headphones, but no one spoke. Dean leaned closer than necessary. "You don't question crew," he said under his breath. "Not you." Micah nodded quickly, confused, afraid of doing more wrong by accident. He reached for his coloring book again, but his fingers trembled slightly. Across the aisle, in seat 1A. Judge Terrence Braxton turned the page on his tablet a little slower than before. His reading glasses slid slightly down his nose. He didn't speak, but he heard everything. The aircraft door sealed with a mechanical thunk. Engines began their subtle growl. A flight attendant gave the safety demonstration. Dean Riker didn't look at Micah again. Not yet. But the air around row 3 grew heavier. Micah stared out the window at the tarmac, pretending he didn't feel it, pretending he hadn't noticed the heat in the attendant's voice, the way no one else had been spoken to like that. He reminded himself what his mother had said. "Smile, say thank you, and stay quiet." But for the first time, Micah felt something tighten in his chest, because staying quiet didn't seem to be helping, and someone behind him was still watching. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane taxied toward the runway. Outside, the tarmac stretched endlessly in pale gray. Inside, the hum of safety announcements buzzed through the intercom while seatbelts clicked into place. Micah sat still, his knees pressed together, arms folded around his coloring book like a lifeline. His hands were small, his posture neat, as if shrinking made him invisible. But even as he stared down, he could feel it. Dean Riker was still watching him. From the corner of his eye, Micah saw the flight attendant move slowly up the aisle, pausing briefly to speak to passengers, checking seatbelts. His smile seemed forced, mechanical. But when he reached Micah's row again, the look returned. There was no smile now, just something sharp and coiled. Micah's heart beat faster. He didn't know what he'd done wrong. He hadn't even spoken again. He didn't make eye contact. He had followed every rule his mother ever taught him. As Dean stepped beside him, the pressure in the air changed. It was like gravity thickened, making it harder to breathe. He crouched just slightly, bringing his face closer. "You think you're clever," he hissed quietly. Micah blinked. "No, sir," he said quickly. "You keep pushing it," Dean continued, voice low and tense. "Keep testing." "I'm not," Micah said, trying to steady his voice. "I didn't mean." And then it happened. It was fast. So fast that the world seemed to fold in on itself. Dean Riker's fist moved in a clean, brutal arc. The sound of knuckles cracking against bone filled the narrow cabin like a firecracker. Micah's head whipped sideways. His cheek slammed against the edge of the armrest with a sickening thud. Time stopped. There was no scream, no cry. Just a thin gasp as the air left his lungs and a stunned silence that fell over the cabin like a curtain. His coloring book slid to the floor. His silver unaccompanied minor tag swung once, then fell limp, the plastic clicking gently against the tray table. The entire front section of the plane froze. Micah didn't move. He couldn't. His mouth opened slightly, a thin line of blood slipping from the corner. His jaw already looked wrong, like it didn't belong to his face anymore. He made a small sound, not a cry, more like a broken whimper, almost apologetic. A woman 2 rows back clutched her chest. A man stood up halfway, eyes wide in disbelief. The teenage boy in 4C, Miles Chan, fumbled for his phone with trembling fingers and hit record, but none of them spoke. Not yet. Dean stood over Micah, chest rising, eyes blazing. He didn't look panicked. He looked satisfied. He got smart, Dean muttered, turning slightly toward the aisle. His voice raised just enough to justify himself. That kind of disrespect earns a lesson. A ripple of gasps moved through the cabin, across the aisle. A quiet shift happened in row 1A. Judge Terrence Braxton closed his tablet without a word. He placed it neatly into the seat pocket, smoothed the crease of his slacks, and stood up with a calm that didn't match the room's horror. He didn't rush. He stepped into the aisle as if he were preparing to give a speech, not confront an act of violence. Dean noticed him now. His eyes darted for just a second, a flicker of recognition crossing his face, though he quickly masked it. "You struck a child," Braxton said evenly. Dean's jaw tightened. "I warned him," he replied. "You didn't see what happened before. He got aggressive." He raised his voice. Braxton raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "I was in seat 1A. I heard everything." Dean faltered for a beat. "Just one." The curtain at the front parted as a younger flight attendant peeked out. His eyes were wide, confused. His hand hovered over his radio, but didn't press it. Braxton turned to him. "Get medical. Tell the captain we need to return to gate immediately." The young man nodded and disappeared behind the curtain. Micah still hadn't moved. His head leaned awkwardly on the armrest. Blood soaked into the collar of his shirt and pooled along the edge of the seat. His fingers twitched once. Dean looked down at him, then at the gathering stares from passengers who were no longer pretending not to see. "I said he got smart," Dean repeated. He talked back. Braxton stepped forward. "And that, to you, justifies striking a 10-year-old. There was a pause, the kind of silence that shifts everything. Dean straightened his back. "You're twisting it," he barked. "He disrespected me. You are entrusted with care, not control," Braxton said, his voice still calm. "You have no authority to punish a child for speaking." A soft chime sounded as a call button was pressed somewhere, then another, and another. Micah stirred slightly, eyes fluttering. He tried to speak, but only managed a wet rasp. The second flight attendant returned. "Medical is meeting us at the gate," he announced shakily. Passengers began murmuring, some raising phones to film. One man held his camera low, capturing Dean's posture, Braxton's composure, and Micah's slumped figure. Dean noticed. His mouth curled. "Don't record me." He snapped. The man didn't lower the phone. Judge Braxton turned slightly to address the cabin. "Everyone, please remain calm and seated. Help is on the way." His voice carried a quiet authority that steadied the air. Even the captain's voice over the intercom sounded more composed when he confirmed the emergency return. Dean began to back away, slowly, inching toward the galley, Braxton followed him with his eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. Dean didn't answer. "I asked you a question," Braxton said again. After a long pause, Dean mumbled, "Riker. Dean Riker." Braxton gave a single nod. "Mr. Riker, you've just made a very serious mistake." The landing gear lowered with a thump as the plane approached the tarmac again. Outside the windows, emergency lights flashed blue and red in the fading afternoon light. Inside, passengers were still silent, but no longer paralyzed. They had seen, they had heard, and now they waited for what would happen next. The wheels of Flight 2287 screeched against the runway, jolting the cabin with a force that echoed deeper than mere turbulence. For a few suspended seconds, no one spoke. It was as if everyone on board had been holding their breath since the moment Micah Elson's head hit the armrest. Outside the windows, Sky Nova personnel in bright orange vests were already racing up the jet bridge. Red and blue emergency lights pulsed against the cabin walls, casting every passenger in rhythmic flashes of consequence. Judge Terrence Braxton remained standing in the aisle, unmoved. His stance was calm, but his eyes burned with clarity. He had seen the moment too many times in courtrooms across the country. It was the look of someone abusing power without expecting to be held accountable. Inside seat 3C. Micah lay sideways, half conscious, his face pale beneath the swelling. Blood had dried around his lips, and his bottom jaw hung askew. His hand twitched softly against his shirt, as if searching for something familiar to hold on to. When the cabin door finally opened, two paramedics entered swiftly. One carried a collapsible stretcher, the other a medical bag strapped to his back. They moved with the silence of professionals, speaking in clipped, precise words. "He's here," the younger flight attendant said quickly, pointing toward row 3. Micah didn't flinch as they approached. He didn't even blink. But when one of the medics knelt beside him and spoke in a low voice, he responded with the faintest nod. "Buddy, I need you to stay very still," the medic whispered, sliding a brace around Micah's neck with care. "Can you squeeze my hand if you understand?" A faint squeeze. Behind them, passengers leaned slightly in their seats, caught in a hush neither dramatic nor performative, just human. One woman began quietly crying. A man near the back muttered, "What the hell is wrong with this airline?" Dean Riker stood near the galley, arms crossed. His eyes darted between the passengers and the judge, calculating. His posture had shifted from arrogant to defensive, but he still clung to a script in his head. The gate supervisor stepped on board, clipboard in hand. She approached Dean first. "What happened?" she asked in a low voice. Dean didn't hesitate. "The kid startled me," he said, gesturing toward Micah. "Got too close. Swung his hand, hit the tray. I reacted. It was instinct, not intentional." The supervisor raised an eyebrow. "You hit him in the face." Dean bristled. "I defended myself." "You weren't here." It escalated quickly. Before she could respond, Judge Braxton stepped forward. "I'd like to speak on record," he said calmly. The supervisor turned, surprised. "And you are?" He extended a card without flinching. "Judge Terrence Braxton, 5th Circuit Court." The clipboard nearly slipped from her hands as she took the card. "You were a passenger?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "I was seated in 1A. Braxton replied. "I witnessed the entire exchange. There was no aggression from the boy, no raised voice, no physical threat. Just a quiet child who politely asked for juice." The supervisor didn't speak. She simply nodded and motioned for the security team waiting by the jet bridge. As the stretcher was wheeled off the plane, Micah's body looked impossibly small against the canvas frame. A thin hospital blanket was draped over him, but one arm slipped out as they turned a corner. His fingers curled slightly in the air, then dropped. A hush followed him out of the aircraft. When the paramedics passed through the terminal doors, flashes erupted from the far end of the hallway. A news crew had arrived. Someone had leaked it. Maybe a ground employee. Maybe a medical technician who saw the name on the manifest and recognized Braxton. Either way, the silence was over. Back on the plane, the supervisor faced Dean again. "You're going to need to come with us to the security office. Please don't speak to anyone else until you've given your statement." Dean hesitated. His eyes swept the cabin, landing for just a second on the teenager in 4C, who now held his phone close to his chest like a secret weapon. "I didn't do anything wrong," Dean muttered. "That's not up to you anymore," Braxton said without raising his voice. Dean was escorted down the aisle by 2 airport officers. He didn't fight, but his clenched fists and hunched shoulders told the story loud enough. When he reached the forward door, he turned one last time, eyes landing on Judge Braxton. "You people don't know what it's like up here," he snapped. Braxton raised a brow. "I do," he said. "I just never mistook my position for permission." The cabin door shut behind Dean with a thud. The remaining passengers sat still, as if unsure whether the world outside had changed enough to let them walk off. Braxton turned to the flight attendant still standing by the galley. "Make sure everyone is offered the chance to submit a written statement. Ask the captain to document the log, including timestamps." The young man nodded quickly. Passengers began gathering their things. Some moved toward the aisle slowly. Others looked as if they were walking through fog. Braxton waited until the cabin was nearly empty before retrieving his coat from the overhead bin. He glanced once toward seat 3C. The coloring book still lay on the floor, a red marker half uncapped beside it. He crouched, picked it up, and tucked it gently into the seat pocket. It felt strange to leave it there, but maybe it would matter later. Outside the terminal, Caleb Elson was already on his way. He had received the call from Skynova's emergency line only 30 minutes earlier. The message had been clinical. "There's been an incident. Your son has been injured. Paramedics are transporting him to Skyland General." They didn't say anything about bruises, or broken bones, or blood. They didn't say anything about fists. Caleb drove through red lights without remembering doing it. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that the leather left an imprint across his palms. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't crying. He was calculating. He hadn't spoken to Micah that morning. Just a text. "You're going to do great. Be brave. I'll call when you land." He hadn't even called before boarding his meeting. He just trusted the system to get his boy safely to Denver. Now that trust was shattering, and when Caleb Elson's trust shattered, it didn't fall quietly. Inside the airport lounge, Judge Braxton made a final phone call before leaving. His voice was low but firm. "I'll need to submit a formal incident report. Yes, immediately. Video may exist. I'm working on securing it." Then he added something quieter. "This one matters. You need to be ready." The operator on the other end didn't ask why. Braxton rarely called unless it mattered. He placed his phone back in his coat pocket and walked toward the sliding doors, the echo of Micah's silence still vibrating in his chest. The double doors to the emergency wing burst open as Caleb Elson stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the fluorescent-lit corridor with a focus that was more instinct than thought. He didn't pause at the front desk. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but carried the weight of something coiled tight beneath the surface. My son, Micah Elson. He was just brought in. I'm his father." The nurse behind the counter tapped rapidly at her keyboard. Her eyes flicked up for only a second before she pointed down the hallway. "Room 2B, trauma observation." Caleb didn't thank her. He didn't blink. He was already walking. Each step echoed in the corridor. The smell of antiseptic clung to the walls, and muffled voices filtered through drawn curtains. As he turned the corner into 2B, his breath caught. Micah lay motionless beneath a pale hospital sheet, the IV taped to his arm gently pulsing with fluid. A stabilizing wrap encased his jaw. Swelling had turned one side of his face into a distorted landscape of purple and red. There were small cuts along his temple, dried blood near his ear, and a bruise blooming beneath one eye. Caleb stopped cold. He didn't move for a long moment, didn't cry, didn't speak. His hands remained clenched at his sides, as though opening them would let something escape that he wasn't ready to release. A nurse stood at the foot of the bed, checking the vitals monitor. She looked up when she saw him. I'm his father," Caleb said softly. She nodded. "He hasn't been able to talk much. Jaw trauma, possibly fractured mandible. We've stabilized him for now, but he'll need imaging and monitoring. He's in pain, but he's resting." Caleb walked slowly to the edge of the bed and lowered himself into the chair beside it. His movements were deliberate, as if performed underwater. He took Micah's hand in both of his and just held it there. The boy's fingers curled slightly in response, and Caleb exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. A whisper of sound escaped from the bed, a soft wheeze. Caleb leaned in. "Daddy," Micah whispered. It barely reached above the pulse of the monitor. "I'm here," Caleb replied. "I've got you." Micah's hand trembled. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said. And then his face contorted not in pain, but in something worse. Fear. Guilt. "I know," Caleb said gently. "You don't have to explain. I know. Micah." His voice remained steady, but something inside him cracked. The door opened quietly behind them. A woman in a navy blazer stepped in. Her ID badge read Nina Calloway, Sky Nova Liaison. She paused at the threshold when she saw the scene. Her voice, when it came, was practiced. "Mr. Elson, I'm Nina Calloway. I've been assigned to assist with next steps and medical logistics. I just want to assure you don't," Caleb said without looking up. She blinked. "Sir, I just want to—" "I said don't," he repeated, turning slowly to face her. "My son is lying in that bed with a shattered face, and you came in here to deliver pre-written empathy. Whatever you're here to offer, I suggest you take it and leave." Nina hesitated. She had dealt with angry families before. But this wasn't rage. This wasn't a man losing control. This was control sharpened into a weapon. "Understood," she said quickly. "If you change your mind, I'll be right outside." When the door clicked shut, Caleb turned back to his son. His hand returned to Micah's, and he smoothed a curl from the boy's forehead. Micah's eyes had drifted shut again. Caleb whispered low, "I'm going to make sure they never touch another child like this again." Back at Sky Nova's Regional Operations Center, 2 floors above the terminal, the crisis team had already convened. A large monitor displayed a paused frame from the video taken by Miles Chan. It showed Dean Riker's arm mid-swing, Micah's face just beginning to recoil. A senior supervisor leaned forward, her voice tight. "We have a situation." The compliance officer beside her nodded grimly. "The judge's testimony is confirmed. Terrence Braxton, Fifth Circuit. He's already submitted a formal statement. Another exec swore under his breath. And we've got a video leak. It's spreading on private aviation forums. It's only a matter of time before mainstream media picks it up. The team fell silent. We can't defend this. The head of public relations said finally, "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is assault on a minor with witnesses and digital proof." "What about the crew?" someone asked. "Dean's been removed from active duty, but he's already filed an incident report blaming the child for being disruptive." There was a beat of silence. "Do we have anything in his file?" asked the compliance officer. A junior analyst typed quickly, then paused. "There's a record of 3 closed HR cases, but they're vague. One's a noise complaint, one lists verbal conflict with minor passenger, and the third was flagged for internal coaching. Any settlements?" "None documented. Buried," someone whispered. The room shifted again. This was no longer about Dean Riker. It was about everything they'd done to keep people like him in uniform. At the hospital. Caleb stepped into the hallway and dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "This is Braxton." Caleb didn't bother with greetings. "I need a copy of the video. The full footage. The one recorded in 4C. Braxton's voice was quiet. "I have it. It's been submitted to authorities, but I can send you a copy. I want it. I've already filed my formal witness statement." "Good. Send me everything." "Caleb," Braxton said gently, "I know that look in your voice. Just remember, you're not at war. You're a father." "I'm both," Caleb replied, and they forgot that matters. He hung up. Later that night, in the quiet of the hospital room, Caleb sat by Micah's side again. The boy slept soundly now, his heartbeat strong and steady on the monitor. The tablet on Caleb's lap played the footage, over and over. The moment Micah looked up, the moment Dean's arm moved, the impact, the slump, the blood. Caleb watched it without blinking. Then he rewound it, watched it again. Each time the blow landed, his grip on the armrest tightened. He didn't scream. He didn't curse. He simply studied. Because Caleb Elson had spent years as a defense strategist. He knew how institutions moved, how they buried evidence beneath bureaucracy, how they waited for silence to protect their image. But now they'd hit the wrong boy. And worse, they had done it while a federal judge was watching. The light in Micah's hospital room flickered softly as the night deepened, its glow casting a halo around his sleeping form. The monitors beeped at steady intervals, offering a rhythm that pulsed through the room like a heartbeat. Caleb hadn't moved in over an hour. He sat upright, hands clasped in front of his mouth, elbows resting on his knees. His eyes were trained on his son's bruised face, but his mind was 1,000 miles away, not in distance, but in time. He remembered the last time he'd seen that look, a crooked jaw, a child too afraid to speak. It wasn't Micah then. It had been himself. Caleb was 8 when a teacher had grabbed him by the collar in the hallway and shoved him against a row of lockers for talking back. He hadn't raised his voice. He had simply asked why his name wasn't on the group list. The slap that followed had sent him to the ground, dizzy and humiliated. His mother had marched into the school with fire in her voice, but nothing changed. The principal apologized. The teacher was reassigned. Caleb had been told to let it go. He never did. And now, watching his own son lying still with cotton tucked inside his mouth and bruises beneath his eye, something inside him clicked. Not rage, not yet. What filled him wasn't fire. It was ice. He reached into his coat pocket and retrieved the tablet again. He opened a private folder, one he hadn't used in years, labeled litigation templates. Inside it were files, old and updated, for class actions, settlements, motions to compel, emergency injunctions. This wasn't new terrain. Caleb Elson had built his career defending children's rights against public school systems that silenced abuse. He had sued cities, cracked policy boards, and won precedent-setting cases. Then, 5 years ago, he'd left it all behind. Micah had been born early, nearly lost in the second trimester. Caleb chose family over courtrooms. He chose peace, but peace had now been broken. His fingers moved quickly across the screen. He drafted notes, pulled templates, marked timestamps from Miles Chan's footage. Every movement was surgical, clean. Emotion was there, but not on the surface. On the surface, he was pure function. There was a knock at the door, not a nurse's tap, a measured knock. Caleb stood, rolled his shoulders, and opened it. Judge Braxton stood in the hallway, coat draped over one arm, a coffee in his hand. "I figured you'd be awake," he said quietly. Caleb stepped back to let him in. Braxton looked at Micah, then at the man beside him. "I gave my full statement to the DOJ," he said. "They'll be investigating, but you already knew that." "I did," Caleb replied. "I also spoke to airport security," Braxton added. "Turns out Dean Riker's been on their radar for over a year. Complaints from black passengers. Nothing escalated before, but now those records matter." Caleb nodded. Braxton studied him for a moment. "You're building something," he said softly. "I can see it. What's your move?" Caleb took a moment before answering. "They want to handle this internally. Offer settlement money, a scripted apology, suspend the employee, then move on. It's what they always do." Braxton waited. "But not this time," Caleb said. "This time, they chose the wrong child, in the wrong seat, with the wrong father. You're going public. I'm going systemic." Braxton gave a slow nod of approval. "I'll support however I can," he said. "I'll need your affidavit, every detail. It's already in motion." Caleb's gaze returned to his son. "I won't let this end with Dean. That culture didn't begin with him. It was allowed, protected." He paused. "And they think I'll take a check and a private settlement because they assume I want it to go away." Braxton watched him carefully. "But they don't know who you used to be," he said. Caleb finally allowed himself a breath of bitter amusement. "No," he said, "they don't." Later that morning, while Micah slept under the watchful eyes of rotating nurses, Caleb stepped into the waiting area and placed a call. "Charlie, it's me." On the other end, Charles Benton, a former litigation partner, exhaled slowly. "Damn. I saw the video an hour ago. I was hoping it wasn't your boy. It's him. Tell me what you need. I need the firm. Quietly. I'll fund it myself if I have to. You still have equity. No need. What are we doing? Settlement press pressure. No. I'm going to take their policy apart. I want every training manual, every complaint log. I want to subpoena internal communications going back 5 years. I want their insurer to panic." "Understood," Charlie said without missing a beat. "I'm filing suit by Friday. We'll draft the demand tonight. I'm naming the airline, the attendant, the supervisors who signed off on prior complaints. I'm also naming the contracting company if that man was third-party hired." Charlie's voice was measured now. "Do you want to go federal out the gate?" "Yes. You're ready for this. I've been ready for this since I was 8 years old." Back at the hospital, Micah stirred as the nurse adjusted his IV. "You awake, baby?" she whispered. Micah nodded slowly. "Can I have some water?" he asked. voice muffled by the swelling. She handed him a straw and gently guided it toward his lips. "You're doing great, sweetheart," she said. "Your dad hasn't left your side." Micah blinked. "Is he mad at me?" "No, love," she said. "He's mad for you." She didn't explain what that meant. She didn't need to. In the Sky Nova executive offices, a small group gathered around a polished table, their general counsel paced, holding a printout of an email thread that had just leaked. One former employee had posted on a private forum, anonymously, stating that Dean Riker's temper had been discussed multiple times during flight staff meetings. That same employee was allegedly told not to make waves if she wanted to keep her job. "We're exposed," the attorney said bluntly. "This is no longer about one man. This is cultural." Another executive, older, leaned back in his chair. "So what are you suggesting?" The attorney dropped the file on the table. "We may be dealing with a class action. If Elson sues, he'll find more." "You think he'll go that far?" The attorney didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the PR rep in the corner. "Find out everything about him. Caleb Elson. Yes. Professional history, legal background, family, anything we can use to negotiate." She left the room without a word. What she didn't know yet was that there wouldn't be much to use. Caleb had spent years building a life of silence, of peace. But now that silence had been pierced, and what came next wouldn't be loud. It would be unstoppable. The press conference was called for 10:00 a.m. sharp. Sky Nova executives stood behind a long white table draped in the airline's signature blue. There were flowers at either end, water bottles arranged neatly. A large monitor behind them displayed the company's logo, clean and unblemished. But the room was tense. Reporters lined the front rows, notepads ready, phones recording. News vans clustered outside the terminal. Cameramen stood shoulder to shoulder. Everyone was waiting, not for clarity, but for the moment something would crack. At the center of the table sat CEO Renata Kessler. Her dark navy blazer was immaculate. Her expression was polished, composed, but her eyes betrayed it. They held the look of someone cornered. Beside her sat three others: legal counsel Marcus Dyer, Chief Operations Officer Teresa Valen, and PR Director Jonah Flanley. Each of them had rehearsed the statement at least 10 times that morning. Still, none of them looked ready. The microphone clicked on. Jonah leaned forward. "Good morning. Thank you all for coming on short notice. We're here today to address the tragic incident involving a minor passenger on Flight 2287. As many of you know, a video has surfaced showing a member of our cabin crew engaging in what appears to be inappropriate physical contact with a child. We take this matter extremely seriously." There was no emotion in his tone. "We want to be clear, Sky Nova does not condone violence of any kind. We are cooperating with the relevant authorities. An internal review is underway, and the employee in question has been placed on indefinite leave." A murmur rippled through the room. Renata took the microphone next. "Our hearts go out to the young passenger and his family. We deeply regret the distress caused. We are actively reaching out to them to offer support. As a mother myself, I cannot imagine the pain they're feeling." The words were right. The delivery was not. A reporter from Channel 8 News raised her hand. "Is it true the child suffered a fractured jaw?" "We cannot disclose medical specifics due to privacy laws," Renata replied smoothly. "But you've seen the video." "Yes. It clearly shows the attendant striking the boy." Jonah leaned in. "We are aware of the footage. We do not yet have the full context of the altercation." Another voice called out. "The boy was 10 years old. What context justifies a grown man punching a child?" This time, Marcus Dyer spoke. "We're not justifying anything. We're asking for a full investigation before drawing conclusions. You're asking the public to wait," another reporter challenged, but the public already watched it happen. A silence fell. In that silence, Caleb Elson watched from Micah's hospital room, a tablet balanced on his lap. Micah was awake now, head propped on a pillow, his jaw supported with bandages. He couldn't speak, but he watched too, and he understood enough. The apology wasn't for him. It was for them, the company, to limit liability, to protect image, to buy time. Caleb's phone vibrated. A message from Charlie. "They're dodging accountability. We're releasing the footage with statement. Upload in 10 minutes. Caleb responded with one word. "Do it." Back in the press room, Renata tried to pivot. "We are launching an internal equity audit. We will also be introducing new training modules designed to prevent bias, encourage de-escalation, and build stronger empathy within our crews. We hope this tragedy becomes a moment of growth, not division." Jonah smiled faintly, as if that were the ending line, but a hand shot up again. "Have you spoken with Judge Terrence Braxton?" The room stilled. Renata hesitated. "We are aware of his presence on the flight. Have you read his statement?" "We are reviewing all witness testimony as part of the process." At that exact moment, phones across the room began to buzz. One, then two, then dozens. Twitter feeds refreshed. News apps pushed alerts. Headlines popped across screens. "Breaking father of assaulted child releases." Full video and legal statement. Federal judge confirms. There was no provocation. Dean Riker had prior complaints buried by Sky Nova management. A reporter read the statement aloud into her mic. "Caleb Elson, legal strategist and father of the victim, declares full legal action against Sky Nova Airlines. He accuses the company of enabling systemic negligence and protecting repeat offenders within its flight staff ranks." The oxygen left the room. Renata stiffened. Jonah's phone began ringing on the table. He ignored it. Marcus Dyer leaned toward her. "Do not respond. Close the conference." But it was too late. The microphones were still live, and the questions were already flooding. Did Sky Nova suppress prior complaints? Will the CEO resign? Are you offering financial settlements in exchange for silence? Why is the judge's statement not part of your official review? Are you planning to contact the Elson family directly or just issue more rehearsed apologies? Renata stood slowly. That concludes today's statement. We will not be taking further questions at this time. She stepped back, her face rigid, and turned toward the side exit. Security ushered her team through quickly, leaving behind only the logo on the screen and a room full of questions without answers. At the hospital, Caleb turned the tablet screen toward Micah. You see that Micah nodded slowly. "They ran," Caleb said. "They tried to spin the story. But the truth is louder." Micah blinked once, then again. Caleb leaned closer. "I'm not just doing this for you," he whispered. "I'm doing it for every kid who sat in that seat before you, everyone who was silenced. We're done being quiet." In a studio across town, a CNN anchor picked up the story. In breaking news, Sky Nova Airlines is under fire after a failed press conference attempting to address the violent assault of a 10-year-old black boy aboard Flight 0287. The child's father, a former legal powerhouse, has just gone public with damning evidence and a sweeping legal threat. Federal Judge Terrence Braxton, an eyewitness, has submitted formal testimony corroborating the boy's innocence. This story is escalating rapidly. Back at Sky Nova headquarters, chaos had replaced choreography. Legal phones rang off the hook. PR staff scrambled to contain viral hashtags. Screens flashed live reactions from passengers who had been on the flight. One woman, her voice shaking, spoke directly into the camera. "I watched that child sit there quietly. I watched him get hit and not even scream. I'm a mother. I'll never forget that sound." Her voice broke. He just wanted apple juice. At the heart of it all. Micah sat in his hospital bed, a little boy with bruises on his face and silence in his throat. But beyond the swelling and bandages, something new flickered in his eyes. Not fear, not confusion. It was understanding. The world had seen him now, and his father, his quiet, relentless father, wasn't done. Morning light crept through the half-closed blinds in Caleb Elson's temporary office at Skyland General Hospital. The space was cramped, just a small desk, a rolling chair, and a whiteboard cluttered with case notes and timelines. On the desk lay 2 tablets flashing the same viral footage of Flight 2287. Micah's face, swollen and bruised, stared back at him. Caleb stretched, rubbed his temples, and glanced at the whiteboard. There was a single word scrawled in red systemic. He tapped a folder labeled Sky Nova Internal and opened an encrypted email. It was from Harlan Boyd, a name he recognized, but barely. Boyd had been a flight attendant on the same route 2 years earlier. He'd quietly left the industry after complaining about unspecified incidents and refusing to sign non-disclosure agreements. His reputation was murky at best, an insider who had tried to speak up and been shut down. Caleb opened the attachment. It was a scanned PDF of an internal policy manual. Page 42, Section 3.4.2. Sensitive Passenger Complaints. Escalation Procedures. Beneath the heading, dozens of bullet points instructed crew to file non-binding reports, redirect complainants to customer service, and close minor incidents without formal investigation upon supervisor approval. The manual glowingly praised efficiency and customer satisfaction over procedural red tape. He scrolled further. Several redacted lines. Then, a handwritten annotation in the margin. Ensure no negative PR engineers remove evidence post 7 days. His breath caught. Someone had literally written "remove evidence." Caleb leaned back, fists clenched. The ice inside him was now a glacier. A quiet knock on the door made him jump. It was Nina Calloway, Sky Nova's hospital liaison. She held a cup of coffee and a tablet. "Mr. Elson? I didn't want to disturb you," she said softly. "Harlan Boyd asked me to pass along this statement." She handed him the tablet. It opened to a video file, on screen. Harlan Boyd sat on a folding chair in a dimly lit room. His face was tired, lined with guilt. "My name is Harlan Boyd. I was a flight attendant for Sky Nova from 2018 to 2022. I'm coming forward because I refuse to stay silent." He paused, glancing down. 2 years ago, I reported an incident almost identical to Micah's. A 9-year-old boy asked for extra legroom. The attendant slammed the boy against the seat in front of him. It wasn't officially recorded. Management told me to let it go. Then they changed the report to passenger uncooperative. I refused. So they reassigned me. Harlan swallowed. I didn't want to get anyone hurt, but I couldn't be complicit. I kept the internal documents. I've sent you everything I have. Please use it to stop them. Caleb felt his chest tighten. He glanced at Nina. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This helps." She offered him the coffee. He shook his head. "I'll call you when I need more." She left, and the door clicked shut. Caleb tapped his phone. He dialed Charlie Benton. "Charlie, I have the policy manual." "Got it." Charlie's voice crackled through. "This is worse than we thought." Caleb recited the annotation. Remove evidence. Yeah, Charlie said, obvious anger in his tone. That's criminal. They're shredding records on purpose. Caleb leaned over the desk. I want to know who signed off on these procedures. And I want every prior complaint that followed this protocol. Charlie confirmed. I'll get subpoenas ready. We'll need to depose managers and procurement heads. If they can't justify destroying records, it's obstruction of justice. Caleb ended the call. He closed the policy manual and picked up the whiteboard marker. Request all complaint logs. 2015-2024. He wrote in bold letters, underlining it twice. Just then, his phone buzzed again. Judge Braxton, a video call. He answered. Braxton appeared, wearing a dark suit and pale blue shirt. Even on video, his eyes were calm, focused. I saw the policy documents, Braxton said. That margin note, that's a confession. I'm going to bring it straight to the House subcommittee, Caleb said. Braxton nodded. I've already arranged for them to convene. You'll have a platform, but you'll need more than hearsay. I have Harlan Boyd's testimony and the judge's personal eyewitness statement. Caleb managed a half smile. We'll build the timeline around those points. They agreed to meet at the Federal Building the next day. Caleb ended the call and exhaled. The glacier was starting to move. Later that afternoon, a soft ping announced a new email. From Miles Chan. The teen had managed to upload the full 4C footage to a secure server. Caleb opened it and watched. It was longer than the widely circulated clip, almost a full minute. It showed Micah politely asking for juice again. Dean's glare, the warning words, then the punch. But after that, it recorded passengers reacting, murmuring, and other crew members glancing over. Half a dozen faces, each one a potential witness. Caleb made notes. He labeled each face by row and seat. Potential witness to be Ms. Thompson, seatmate, and so on. Around 3 p.m. He gathered his things and left the hospital. The sky was clear but gray, with winter cold. He hopped into his car and drove to a small cafe near the Federal Building, a neutral spot where he and Braxton had arranged to meet. Inside, the cafe smelled of espresso and baked bread. A few lunchtime regulars sipped lattes while scrolling on tablets. He spotted Braxton at a corner table, tablet open, notes spread out, true to form. Braxton motioned him over with a slight nod. They ordered water. Words were minimal at first. They each reviewed their documents in silence. Braxton cleared his throat. The subcommittee will start with a hearing on Monday. We'll need opening statements and supporting exhibits by Friday. It's Thursday. Caleb set down his water. We had a tight window. Braxton pointed to the files. Policy manual, Harlan's statement, Miles's footage, and my testimony. You need a short dossier executive summary for each document and a list of witnesses to call. Caleb nodded, turning to his own folder. He flipped to a typed page, Sky Nova Flight Safety Ethics Internal Complaint Review, 2015-2024. He sighed. I've been parsing 5 years' worth of complaints. It's messy. Braxton raised an eyebrow. But patterns emerge. Yes, Caleb said. At least 12 incidents involving minors. 4 that match before Micah. All routed through subsection 3.4.2. All closed without formal inquiry. Names deleted or redacted. H.R. File notes say, resolved no misconduct. Braxton made a note. That will form the backbone of systemic negligence. Caleb sat back. For a moment, he let himself feel exhaustion. But then he flicked his eyes up. I want the CEO in the hearing. He said, in person. Braxton nodded. We'll request that. But more importantly, I'll open with the margin annotation. Break the room on day 1. Caleb allowed himself a small, grim smile. Powerful men called this breaking the room. He had experience. They finished their water, packed their folders, and left together. As they stepped onto the sidewalk, the wind sliced the cold straight through their coats. They walked in silence toward the federal building, a silent pair carrying the cold flame of justice up the marble steps. Inside, they passed security. ID badges scanned. No applause, no ceremony. Just another morning in government corridors. In the hearing room, chairs lined up on either side of a long table. Caleb and Braxton sat near the front, surrounded by reporters and staffers. A clerk called the room to order. They looked at each other, nodded. The clerk called their names. Caleb rose first. He turned to the panel of 5 subcommittee members. "My name is Caleb Elson," he said, voice calm but resonant. "I stand before you today not only as the father of a 10-year-old who was assaulted in plain sight, but as someone who has spent his life defending the vulnerable. What I will present are not allegations grounded in conjecture, but documented evidence captured in policy manuals, corroborated by internal witnesses, and witnessed firsthand by a federal judge. This is not just about one man's violent moment. It is about an entire system designed to protect repeat offenders." At that moment, the glacier melted, and the flood began. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the federal courthouse as people began to fill the gallery. Oh, the atmosphere was electric. Cameras clicked, murmurs passed, and court staff guided latecomers to seats. Inside the courtroom, rows of polished oak benches faced the raised bench where Judge Wilton Stokes presided. He wore a crisp black robe and regarded the packed room with a solemn gaze. At the front, Caleb Elson sat to the right of the prosecutor's table. His folder lay open, crisp exhibit labels visible. Exhibit A Policy Manual, Exhibit B Harlan Boyd Witness Statement, Exhibit C Miles Chan Video Footage. He felt the weight of every page as reassurance. Beside him sat Judge Terrence Braxton. He wore a suit rather than his judicial robes. His presence alone sent a ripple through the courtroom. Behind them, Harlan Boyd and Miles Chan waited quietly. On the left, Dean Riker sat stiffly. His attorney, Grant Marrero, whispered something in his ear. They looked uncomfortable under the glare of attention. The clerk called the court to order. Judge Stokes rapped his gavel once. Silence enveloped the room. The prosecutor, Amelia Holbrook, rose. She held a tablet in her hand. Her calm voice carried to every corner. "Your Honor, members of the jury, we are here to prove that the defendant, Dean Riker, assaulted a 10-year-old child, not once but repeatedly, that this offense was neither isolated nor accidental, and that Sky Nova Airlines bore responsibility for fostering a culture that allowed such violence to occur. We will present evidence demonstrating systemic negligence, corroborated by policy documents, eyewitness testimony, expert analysis, and the child's own unwavering courage." She paused, allowing the words to settle. "We begin with video evidence." She tapped the tablet. The large monitor behind her lit up with the footage from Seat 4C, first the wide shot, then slowed motion, Micah's polite request for apple juice, Dean's sharp glare, the blow that broke the boy's jaw, the cabin's stunned reaction. Gas echoed. Some jurors leaned forward. Amelia tapped again. The screen switched to the Internal Policy Manual, page 42, section 3.4.2. The highlighted margin note glowed in red. Section 3.4.2 authorized crew to file non-binding reports of passenger complaints and close incidents without formal investigation. The margin annotation directs staff to remove negative feedback to avoid public relations issues. One juror nodded slowly. Amelia turned to face the jury. These policies created an environment where repeat offenders were protected. Dean Riker struck Micah Elson because he knew he could. That knowledge was written into the rules. She returned to her seat. Caleb glanced at Braxton. The judge gave a small nod. Grant Maroro rose for the defense. He straightened his tie and faced the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, no one here condones violence against a child. My client, Dean Riker, has expressed regret for his actions. But the question is intent. Was this assault premeditated, or was it a panicked response to perceived threat? We will show that the defendant acted out of startled reflex and genuine confusion over the child's behavior. We will call an expert in human behavior and body language who will testify that Mr. Riker's reaction was involuntary. He sat. Murmurs rippled. Amelia stood for her first witness. The prosecution calls Dr. Leonard Bryce. From the front row, a tall man in a dark suit approached the witness stand. He was in his mid-50s, silver-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. Dr. Bryce's posture was confident. He adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. Prosecutor Holbrook began. Dr. Bryce, you are a behavioral analyst specializing in human movement. I am, he replied smoothly. You have reviewed the footage of Flight 2287 multiple times, he said, from various angles. When you watched Dean Riker's actions, what did you observe? Dr. Bryce folded his hands. In the moments before the punch, I observed anticipatory aggression rather than startled response. His shoulders shifted forward, his weight transferred, and his right hand formed a fist well before contact. These micro-movements indicate intent. He paused. Preliminary startle reflex would involve rapid flinching backward, not forward motion toward a target. Some jurors exchanged glances. Holbrook pressed on. So you conclude this was not a reflexive action, but a deliberate escalation? Yes. Thank you, Dr. Bryce. The defense attorney, Grant Maroro, rose for cross-examination. Dr. Bryce, you base your conclusion on visual markers, microshifts in weight, shoulder alignment. Is it possible these observations are subject to interpretation? Dr. Bryce tilted his head. All expert testimony involves some interpretation. But these markers are widely accepted in behavioral analysis. Maroro nodded to himself. No further questions. He sat. The gallery scribbled notes. Next. Amelia called Miles Chan to the stand. The teenager walked briskly, phone still in his pocket. He looked nervous but determined. The clerk swore him in. Miles Chan, you recorded the incident I did. Did you edit the clip shown here? No. I uploaded the full recording. He described how he sat in 4C, how he held his phone low to avoid detection. He explained what he saw Micah politely asking for juice, the attendant's glare, then the punch. He made clear that no sudden movement by Micah could have justified the force used. His testimony was brief but powerful. The jury listened, rapt. Next, Amelia called Judge Braxton. He stood and walked to the stand, calm and measured. Judge Braxton, you witnessed the assault from seat 1A. What did you hear? He described hearing no provocation, no raised voice. He recounted Dean's words. Watch your tone and your answer. He testified that Dean's fist connected long after he had realized Micah did nothing threatening. His presence carried weight beyond the words. Some jurors sat straighter. Grant Maroro attempted to undermine the judge's memory, asking about distance and ambient noise. Braxton held firm. His voice was unwavering. Then Amelia asked for the final witness of the day, Caleb Elson. He rose, moving with calm authority. His suit was tailored, his expression composed. He approached the stand and looked at the jury. Mr. Elson, you have studied the airline's internal policies, I have, he said. You discovered procedural directives that prioritized reputation management over passenger safety. He clicked open his folder. The jury viewed in large print of the margin note, ensure no negative PR. This directive encouraged the deletion of evidence and silencing of complainants. It is a roadmap for disregard. He then described Harlan Boyd's testimony from his hospital office. He outlined the 4 prior incidents, all minors, all closed without inquiry. The jury absorbed the systematic pattern. They leaned forward as he concluded, "This is not about one bad apple. It is about a rotten orchard." He sat. Amelia nodded in thanks. Judge Stokes consulted his notes. "We will adjourn until tomorrow morning at 9. Please remember not to discuss this case among yourselves. Court is in recess." The gavel fell. As the room emptied, Caleb and Braxton lingered. Braxton placed a hand on his shoulder. "Strong showing," he said quietly. Caleb nodded. "The real test begins in closing arguments." Outside, reporters crowded around the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed as Grant Marrero and Dean Riker emerged. Grant offered a terse statement about due process. Dean refused to speak. Across the street, Caleb joined Braxton under a canopy of stone columns. A CNN reporter approached. "Mr. Elson, have you achieved justice today?" He considered the question. "Not yet, but every truth we've brought forward will lead to accountability." He turned away, walking back into the lobby with Braxton at his side. The seeds planted in that courtroom would grow. The orchard could not be ignored forever. The courtroom fell into a heavy hush as Micah Elson's wheelchair was guided into the center aisle. Cameras clicked softly in the back, but the jury didn't look at them. They watched the small figure before them, perched beneath the bright lights as if on a stage designed for courage. Caleb Elson rose and approached his son. He lowered himself to one knee, gently straightened Micah's blanket, and brushed a stray curl from the boy's forehead. The swelling had reduced slightly, but the bandages still framed Micah's jaw in stark white. He gave his father a small nod. Caleb whispered, "You ready?" Micah blinked once, then again. He nodded. The bailiff guided them to the witness box. The wood steps looked tall from Micah's small perspective. He gripped the railing with one hand and the bailiff's outstretched arm with the other. Each step brought him closer to dozens of eyes, but he kept his gaze fixed on the prosecutor, Amelia Halbrook. Amelia's voice dropped to a gentle tone. "I'll ask you 3 questions, Micah. If you need to stop, just let me know." Okay, Micah nodded again. First question. Did you touch or try to touch Dean Riker before he hit you? Micah's gaze flickered to his father and back. No. His voice was soft but clear. Second question. Did you say anything threatening to him? Micah hesitated longer this time. His jaw flexed against the bandages. He opened his mouth. No. Amelia offered a comforting nod. Third question. What did Dean Riker say right before he punched you? Micah drew a breath. He looked at the gallery, then at the jury. The courtroom waited. He took his time. He blinked once. Then he spoke. Let's see you talk now. Silence settled like a blanket. Even the judge paused, pen mid-air over his notes. Micah's small words rang like a verdict, the power imbalance exposed in a child's phrase. Caleb's chest tightened. He felt tears but blinked them away. He glanced at Judge Braxton seated a few rows behind him. Braxton's eyes glimmered with respect and something fiercer, like pride. Grant Marrero rose from the defense table. Face pale. Objection, Your Honor. That question was leading. The judge tapped his gavel once no. It was not sustained. The objection fell flat. Amelia returned to her seat, and Micah nodded to the bailiff. He climbed down the steps with steady determination. He didn't rush. His chin lifted slightly as he passed his father. Caleb placed a hand on his shoulder and gave him a small smile. Back at the prosecutor's table, Amelia stood again and addressed the jury. With that testimony you have heard directly from the victim himself. The defendant's own words confirm the injury was intentional, not accidental. These simple words from a child demonstrate the brutality of the act. The system may have allowed it, but his voice ended it here. The defense attorney, Grant Marrero, rose to begin his cross, but paused mid-step. Instead of addressing the jury, he simply watched Micah return to Caleb's side. The image caused a stir among a few spectators. He cleared his throat and said no further questions, but his attempt at composure wavered. The courtroom murmured as everyone realized the tone had shifted irreversibly. Micah had spoken truth to power. His voice had shattered the last facade. When court adjourned for lunch, jurors filed out with serious expressions. Reporters leaned over each other to get comments. One camera focused on Micah being helped into his wheelchair by Caleb. The father's hand rested protectively on his son's back. In that protective gesture was a promise that transcended legal arguments. A young reporter from the front row approached Caleb. "Mr. Elson, can you share how you're feeling after hearing your son testify?" Caleb paused, considered the question, then replied, "Justice isn't just a word for us today. It's a reality that children like Micah deserve to see." He looked down at his son, who clutched a small action figure in his lap. "Then, and only then, can we say our work is done." Micah watched, but didn't answer. He focused on the toy, turning it slowly in his hand. Despite his injuries, his eyes held quiet fire, as if every word he'd spoken was now fuel. Back in the courtroom for afternoon session, the first witness was the defense's body language expert, Dr. Leonard Bryce. His tone tried to be neutral. He said reflex actions can resemble premeditated movements. The jury leaned forward, unconvinced Amelia had prepared for this moment. She interjected, "With all due respect, Dr. Bryce, the slow, deliberate nature of those movements indicates calculated aggression, not reflex." The jury exchanged glances. Next, the defense tried to call a character witness, another flight attendant, to attest to Dean Riker's kindness over the years. But when Sky Nova HR attempted to locate someone willing, the hallway outside the court filled with the hush of refusal. Every former colleague declined or cited confidentiality. A handful had been quietly informed they couldn't testify under company policy. Amelia seized on that moment. They hide behind NDAs, but those who knew him best will not speak for him. That alone speaks volumes about the culture. By late afternoon, the mood in the courtroom had shifted decisively. Even Grant Marrero looked as if he'd lost his footing. He whispered frantically to Dean, who shook his head and stared at the floor. Judge Stokes called for closing statements in the morning. Today the evidence was sealed. Tomorrow they would argue the law. As the jury was let out, Amelia turned to Caleb, whispered everything went well. He gave her a brief nod. "Thank you." She smiled back and left. Judge Braxton hovered near the exit. He caught Caleb's eye. "Good job," he said quietly. The ice in Caleb thawed into acknowledgement. "Thanks," he replied. "I couldn't have done it without you." Outside the courtroom steps, reporters clamored for quotes. Caleb and Braxton walked down together under towering columns. The wind carried the sound of sirens and murmurs like distant thunder. A photographer snapped a photo of the two men. In it, the boy's father and the federal judge walked side by side, one a strategist fueled by quiet rage, the other a guardian of justice whose witness had turned the tide. Micah would watch that photo someday. He would see a moment when the system began to bend under truth. Morning light seeped through the tall windows of the courtroom as jurors filed back to their seats. An expectant hush fell. Today the verdict would arrive. But before that, a final flurry of witness testimony and argument would seal Dean Riker's fate. At the front, Dean sat at the defense table, shoulders slumped. His once pristine uniform now seemed a costume he no longer inhabited. Grant Marrero hovered beside him, whispering rapid encouragements that went unheeded. Prosecutor Amelia Halbrook stood to call her final witness, Harlan Boyd. The former flight attendant entered the stand with slow steps. His posture was weary but resolute. He glanced at Dean before speaking. The clerk swore him in, and Boyd began, "I spent 4 years working with Dean Riker on various SkyNova flights. I observed his pattern. He berated passengers for minor issues. He yelled at an elderly man once over seating confusion. He was reported for shoving a special needs child in 2019. I filed a formal complaint which was never investigated. Then I was asked to sign a non-disclosure or face termination. I refused, so they reassigned me off the 2287 route. I kept copies of those requests and responses, which I've provided here." He handed over a stack of emails between him and SkyNova Human Resources. The chain included language urging him to delete the correspondence or risk disciplinary action. Jurors examined the printed exhibits. Amelia guided them. "What does this document prove?" "Mr. Boyd, it shows the company knowingly covered up incidents that management prioritized reputation over passenger safety." "Thank you." She turned to the jury. "These reports show a clear pattern of unchecked abuse. Now that they are exposed, you can see Dean Riker was never an isolated case." Boyd stepped down, and Grant Marrero rose for his cross-examination. His voice was measured. "Mr. Boyd, you left voluntarily false. You were reassigned after refusing the NDA, that is forced consent." Mr. Boyd took notes but declined to challenge further. Amelia resumed her seat and turned to Judge Stokes. "Your Honor, the prosecution rests. As evidence shows, Dean Riker's actions were intentional, supported by company policy, and part of a repeated pattern." Grant Marrero stood for the defense's final witness. He called a human resources manager from SkyNova, Susan Fletcher, to the stand. She arrived in a crisp suit, clutching a notebook. The clerk administered the oath. Marrero began. "Ms. Fletcher, you supervise complaint files for SkyNova." "Yes, Marrero." "Did you ever delete or direct deletion of serious incidents?" "No. We followed standard procedure of escalating to senior management, Marrero. But standard procedure allowed these matters to be closed without investigation." "Yes." "If management approved, yes." Marrero. "Did you ever review Dean Riker's file?" "I did, yes." "How many formal investigations resulted?" "0, none." Marrero. "Nothing further." The room shifted as Fletcher returned to her seat. The defense rested without calling Dean Riker to testify. He sat motionless as Grant Marrero shook his head slightly. Amelia rose for her closing argument. She quietly surveyed the courtroom, then addressed the jury. "Jurors, you heard from a federal judge and eyewitness to the assault. You saw video footage you learned from a flight attendant who sacrificed his career to speak truth. You reviewed a policy manual instructing concealment of incidents, and a human resources manager confirming those policies were enacted. All proof converges. One man abused his power repeatedly. His employer protected him until a child broke his silence. You must hold him accountable." She sat, and Grant Marrero stood for his closing. His tone was reverent. "Ladies and gentlemen, the law requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The evidence suggests a tragic mistake, an overreaction to perceived threat," Dr. Bryce testified, "to startle response. The defendant acted instinctively. He did not intend to harm. A single punch is not chronic violence. Consider context and give him the benefit of doubt. He paced slowly. The prosecution paints a systemic failure. But we cannot convict a man for every administrative shortcoming of Sky Nova. We must focus on the individual act. The jurors listened without reaction. Maroro sat, and Judge Stokes rose for his instructions to the jury. His voice steady, members of the jury. You will deliberate on the charge of aggravated assault of a minor and obstruction of justice. Each element requires your unanimous decision. You may now retire to consider your verdict. The bailiff led the jury into the deliberation room. A hush fell over the courtroom. Guests whispered. Cameras shifted focus. Dean Riker looked at Grant Maroro and said nothing. Minutes stretched into tension. Caleb sat beside Micah in the gallery. Micah watched the door with wide eyes. His small hand gripped Caleb's coat. At last the jury filed back. Their expressions were somber. The judge asked, "Has the jury reached unanimous verdicts?" For a person? "Yes, Your Honor." The verdicts are read by the clerk. On charge 1, aggravated assault of a minor, we find the defendant guilty. On charge 2, obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. A hush as the words landed. Dean's face drained color. Grant Maroro closed his eyes briefly. Chick of pens across notebooks signified reporters capturing every moment. Judge Stokes turned to Dean Riker. "Mr. Riker, you have been found guilty of aggravated assault of a minor and obstruction of justice. Sentencing will occur in 2 weeks." The gavel struck. Court was adjourned. Caleb and Micah rose. Eyes locked on Dean. They watched him rise, escorted out by marshals. Dean's shoulders were rigid. His gaze flicked toward Micah for a moment, then dropped. Outside on the steps, reporters yelled questions. Dean offered no words. He was led down the stairs and into a waiting vehicle. Caleb and Micah made their way down a side corridor. Amelia Hallbrook approached Caleb. "Congratulations," he said softly. "Thank you," he replied. "We only did half the work." She nodded. "I'll see you at sentencing." "Yes," he said. Judge Braxton appeared at the hallway entrance. He smiled at Caleb. "A job well done." Caleb said, "Thank you, Judge." "You gave this case its turning point." Braxton nodded. "And your son gave it its voice." Caleb glanced back toward the empty courtroom, then down at Micah, whose face was bruised but radiant with resolve. "This isn't the end," Micah said softly. "I know, son," Caleb said softly. "Let's go home." They exited into the bright afternoon as news helicopters roared overhead. There would be more work ahead, but in this moment, one man had faced justice, and a system began to reckon with its failures. The morning after Dean Riker's conviction, the halls of Sky Nova headquarters were thick with tension. Emails scrolled across executive inboxes like a digital Tide News clips of the verdict. Opinion pieces lambasting the airline's culture. Internal Slack threads buzzing with panic. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, a federal subcommittee on airline safety convened in Washington, D.C., summoning Sky Nova's leadership alongside Caleb Elson and Judge Terrence Braxton. The room was stark-long mahogany table, bright overhead lights, placards numbering each seat. Subcommittee Chair Representative Linda Morales presided, her gaze disciplined and unflinching. Around her sat senators, representatives, and staff, tensely studying binders labeled Sky Nova documents. Caleb Elson and Judge Braxton took their places at the witness table alongside General Counsel Marcus Dyer and CEO Renata Kessler. Caleb remained calm, expression neutral, eyes focused on Morales. Braxton sat beside him, suit impeccable, hands folded. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morales began, "we are here to examine the systemic failures that led to a violent assault on a minor aboard a commercial flight. We have evidence showing cover-up policies that protected repeat offenders. We will hear testimony, review documents, and determine whether federal oversight is necessary." She turned to Caleb. Mr. Elson, as the lead plaintiff in a federal case against Skynova, can you summarize your findings? Caleb stood and approached the lectern, pulling a folder marked Exhibit D Policy Cover-Up. His voice was measured and unwavering. Thank you, Representative. Over the past week, we submitted documentation showing Skynova's Section 3.4.2 policy instructed crew to file non-binding reports for sensitive complaints, then remove them after 7 days to protect company image. We presented margin annotations explicitly directing evidence destruction. We brought forward testimony from Harlan Boyd, a former flight attendant who refused non-disclosure and retained internal emails proving that incidents involving minors were routinely closed without investigation. We showcased video evidence from Miles Chan proving an unprovoked assault. We had a federal judge, Judge Terrence Braxton, testify under oath as an eyewitness. These combined show that the violence was not a single aberration, but the predictable outcome of a corporate culture built on concealment and negligence. He returned to his seat. The committee members scribbled notes. Morales nodded and addressed Braxton. Judge Braxton, you witnessed the assault. What made you come forward? Braxton rose, voice calm. I believed in the sanctity of the law and the vulnerability of children. When I realized an unarmed 10-year-old was assaulted with zero provocation, I could not remain silent. My testimony confirms a failure of oversight within Skynova's system. Morales turned to CEO Renata Kessler. Ms. Kessler, how do you respond to these allegations of cover-up? Kessler's posture stiffened. She took a breath. Representative, Skynova deeply regrets the incident. We have launched internal reviews and are cooperating fully with authorities. We acknowledge past deficiencies and are implementing new de-escalation training, updated complaint protocol, and enhanced reporting transparency. A junior staffer passed her a note. She glanced at it, eyes darting. Morales interjected. You speak of cooperation, yet evidence shows records were intentionally destroyed. Can you guarantee all past incidents have been unearthed? Kessler hesitated. We are conducting audits, but I cannot speak to every historical record in detail. Morales pressed on. Then may we assume the potential exists for other unreported cases? Kessler cleared her throat. We believe our current measures minimize such risk. A murmur rose. Morales shook her head. Minimization is not enough. She turned to Marcus Dyer. General Counsel, why was Section 3.4.2 written to remove records after 7 days? Dyer swallowed. The policy was intended to streamline complaint management, prevent frivolous claims from clogging the system, and focus resources on serious incidents. But serious incidents were erased. Morales countered. That policy is self-defeating. Dyer offered no reply. Congressman Thomas Reed leaned forward. Mr. Elson, you recommend federal oversight. What form should that take? Caleb approached the lectern again. I propose an independent aviation safety commission with binding authority to audit complaint records, enforce transparent reporting of minor and major incidents alike, and impose penalties for deliberate record destruction. This would ensure airlines can no longer conceal systemic misconduct. Morales nodded, then addressed the room. We will draft legislation accordingly, but I want a commitment from Skynova now. Will you support an independent audit of your entire complaint database? Kessler stiffened, then gave a small nod. Yes, on the condition of confidentiality agreements to protect privacy. Not good enough, Morales said firmly. We need public accountability. Several members of the subcommittee leaned in. Kessler swallowed but did not retract. Reed spoke next. Judge Braxton, do you believe existing FAA oversight could have prevented this? Braxton considered. Possibly. If the FAA had access to unredacted complaint data, but the data never reached the FAA because of internal policies like 3.4.2. The problem lies with corporate gatekeeping, not just regulatory reach. A reporter's pen scratched on paper as the testimony continued into afternoon. Witness after witness described minor incidents involving senior crew, all quietly dismissed. Sky Nova executives offered corporate speak apologies, but each was overshadowed by internal emails detailing escalations blocked by higher-ups. By late afternoon, the committee staff prepared a preliminary recommendation: nationwide mandatory reporting of all passenger complaints to a federal database, severe penalties for record tampering, and routine audits. As the hearing adjourned, Morales addressed Sky Nova directly. This committee will introduce legislation. Sky Nova is expected to comply or face penalties. The room emptied in a flurry of paper shuffling. Caleb and Braxton rose to leave. Kessler and Dyer lingered, their expressions a mixture of relief and resignation. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Caleb and Braxton stepped onto the steps together. A journalist called out Mr. Elson. "Is this the end of the fight?" He looked up at Micah sitting nearby in a wheelchair, his eyes fading tired but brighter than before. "It's only the beginning," Caleb said. "We held a man accountable. Now we're holding a system to account." Judge Braxton placed a hand on his shoulder. "Well said." Caleb glanced at the courthouse behind them. "We've given every child a voice." And with that, they turned toward the future, knowing their victory was not just a conviction, but a promise of lasting change. The sun dipped low over Skyland City as Caleb Elson and Micah stepped off the curb outside Skyland International Airport. The winter chill had softened into an early spring breeze. A newly built structure gleamed beside the terminal, the Micah Elson Safe Passages Lounge. Its glass facade curved like an open embrace. Above the entrance, bold letters spelled out the name and enduring promise to every child who flew alone. Micah stared up at the sign. His jaw still ached. The bandages gone, but the faint scar tracing from ear to chin. He rubbed the side of his face, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. For the first time since that flight, he felt more than relief. He felt hope. Caleb reached over and gently took his son's hand. "Are you ready?" he asked. Micah nodded. "Let's go in." Inside, the lounge was warm and quiet. Soft pastel walls were painted with murals of birds taking flight and children exploring distant lands. Plush armchairs formed cozy clusters, and low bookshelves held stories donated by families whose lives had been touched by the Safe Passages initiative. A play area featured building blocks and puzzles, and soft music played from concealed speakers. A young attendant in a blue polo approached them with a welcoming smile. "Welcome to the Micah Elson Safe Passages Lounge. We're so honored you're here today." Caleb returned the smile. "Thank you. It's a beautiful space." The attendant nodded. "Would you like a tour, or would you prefer to settle in?" Micah tugged on his father's sleeve. "Can we see the library?" They followed the attendant to the bookshelf. Micah's fingers traced the spines of the books. Each bore a small sticker donated by the Micah Elson Initiative. He selected a picture book about a little bird learning to fly. He pressed it to his chest, then looked up at the attendant. "Thank you." The attendant's eyes shone. "It's on us." Caleb watched his son find a seat by the window and begin to read. Other children trickled in, some clutching teddy bears, others clutching passports or boarding tags. Parents waved goodbye and left, trusting their children to the safe space. Some of the adults paused at the entrance to thank Caleb and the attendant before hurrying back to the terminal. Outside, television cameras rolled as reporters set up for live segments. A crowd of well-wishers gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony that would follow shortly. The lounge had been 6 months in the making, born out of a grassroots campaign started by Caleb and local advocates. It was a model soon to be replicated in airports across the nation. Caleb stepped out into the mild breeze and surveyed the scene. He wore a dark coat, collar turned up against the wind, but his expression was open, reflective. Judge Terrence Braxton stood beside him, adjusting his tie. Behind them, Marcus Dyer and Renata Kessler emerged from the terminal, flanked by PR handlers and the occasional airport executive. Former officials who had fought the reforms now came to witness their effect. A platform had been set up beneath the curved awning. A podium stood center stage, adorned with the Safe Passages logo. Children queued behind the barrier, clutching crayons to color banners that read "Safe Skies for Kids" and "Thank you, Micah." Congresswoman Linda Morales arrived, greeted by applause. She wore a bright scarf and carried a folder labeled Federal Travel Safety Act. She approached Caleb, shook his hand warmly, and gave Micah a fist bump that made the boy giggle. Micah's laughter echoed across the plaza. For an instant, everyone paused their busy preparations to share that moment of pure joy. Caleb cleared his throat and stepped up to the podium. A hush fell. Camera zoomed in. His heart thumped, not with fear, but with purpose. He glanced down at Micah, then raised his eyes to the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," he began, voice steady but warm. "When this journey started, I never imagined standing here with my son smiling. I only knew the silence was not an option. That children deserve safe skies, not fear. That no apology or check could undo the harm done. They need protection. They need respect. They need a place like this lounge, a refuge." He paused, gazing at Micah, who watched from the front row alongside Judge Braxton and Congresswoman Morales. "Micah, this is your legacy," Caleb said softly. "Not because you were hurt, but because you spoke up, because you refused to be silent." Micah stood slowly, small and determined. He climbed onto a low stool next to his father and held out a small pair of golden scissors tied with a blue ribbon. Congresswoman Morales took the scissors and held them with Micah. "Ready?" she asked. Micah pumped his fist. "Ready." They cut the ribbon. Applause rippled through the crowd. Reporters shouted questions, some about the lounge, some about the Federal Travel Safety Act now moving through Congress. Cameras flashed as Caleb lifted Micah onto his shoulders. The boy grinned, eyes bright. Inside the lounge, families and staff embraced. Attendants offered refreshments. Children explored games and books. A sense of calm and safety permeated every corner. After the ceremony, Caleb and Judge Braxton sat at a small cafe table inside the lounge cafe area. Steam rose from 2 cups of coffee. Micah played nearby with a group of children, his laughter now a gentle melody. Braxton sipped his coffee. "You've done more than create a lounge." Caleb nodded. "We've given these kids a voice and a haven." Braxton pointed at the children, "and a seat at the table." Caleb looked out at the bright murals and the busy children. "I hope this is the first of many." Braxton smiled. "It will be." A soft knock announced the arrival of Charles Benton and Amelia Halbrook. They joined the table. Amelia opened her notebook. Congress passed the first hearing recommendations in record time. The Federal Travel Safety Act is on the Senate floor. She looked at Micah, then at Caleb. "All your work." Charlie tapped his phone. "Stock prices for Skynova have stabilized after the audit announcement. They're in compliance with the new rules." Caleb exhaled. This was never about the stock price. Amelia nodded. It was about people. They all watched as Micah led a small tour, showing younger children the building blocks. Each child wore a tiny tag saying, "Safe Passenger." He explained how to stack towers without letting them fall. They listened. Caleb felt tears prick his eyes. He cleared his throat. Micah walked over and climbed into Caleb's lap. He looked up at his father. "Can we read the bird story now?" Caleb smiled. "Of course." He retrieved the picture book from earlier. He and Micah curled into an armchair. Amelia, Charles, and Judge Braxton continued conversation. But Caleb and Micah entered their own world. Quiet pages turned. Birds soared across watercolor skies. Micah's small voice read simple words between breaths. When he finished, Micah closed the book and set it aside. He looked up at his father. "Thank you for speaking for me." Caleb hugged him gently. "Thank you for teaching me too." They sat together, the lounge bustling around them, a living testament to what can happen when one boy's voice breaks through fear and every adult answers the call. As the sun set over the terminal beyond the glass wall, the sky glowed pink and gold. Airplanes taxied by with lullaby roars. Children played safely. Wings of imagination unfurled. A new chapter had begun for Micah, for every child who flew alone, and for a system learning to bend toward compassion and accountability. We watched fear transform into fierce courage and silence evolve into systemic change. Micah's journey from a frightened, unaccompanied minor to the namesake of a national Safe Passages program reminds us that empathy can outshine prejudice, and compassion can shatter injustice. His father's relentless pursuit of accountability and Judge Braxton's unwavering integrity turned one violent punch into a catalyst for real reform. But this is just the beginning. Each of us carries the responsibility to protect the vulnerable, to speak out when we witness discrimination, and to demand better from the systems designed to safeguard us. If you've been moved by Micah's bravery, click like, share this video with friends, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire change. Next up, we'll uncover how communities nationwide are rallying around the Safe Passages initiative and what you can do to help every child soar without fear. Stay with us with